All right, welcome back to another episode of the Cameo podcast. I'm sitting outside with published author Alex Mcgilvery, who has been supporting this podcast in various ways online, sending me a chapter of one of his novels for me to try and read. I never got around to that. Eventually, now here we are sitting outside having a coffee. How's it going today?
Yeah, going pretty good. I woke up, I got coffee. Life's good.
Yeah, it's a pretty good day today for me as well.
Mm-hmm.
I just actually doubled my antidepressant dosage, and it seems to be going well so far. I know that you've had a trying year this year as well. You came to Kamloops. Your housing situation kind of went up
in flames.
Yeah, went up with flames. Are you all kind of stable, situated now?
Yeah, we are in a really nice place down by the river, just across from the river trails.
Oh, amazing.
So it's good. It's funny you talk about doubling your dosage. I cut mine in half.
Well, yeah. Well, my dosage was too low. The doctor said I barely a month and a bit onto it, or whatever it be, right? So
that's how it goes.
She wanted to make sure that it was high enough that there was actual results, or whatever it be, right? So it's a new foray for me. And actually, yeah, my dad, he listens to the podcast, of course, and that's probably the most he's heard of me talking about that side of things.
Yep.
So, but I understand you're a big advocate for mental health as well.
Oh, definitely. I more and more I'm working mental health into my writing. So I have characters who live with mental health. I don't like this word fight or struggle or whatever. People live with it. They manage it. So I just got shortlisted for an anthology that is all about mental health and fantasy stories, short
Interesting.
stories. So I've got my fingers crossed. I hear in November.
Is that a Canadian thing, an international thing?
I'm not sure where they're publishing from. It was a Kickstarter program. I saw this thing on Kickstarter, and so I had to throw money at it, and then I had to submit a story. And they've got some big name authors who are doing like the 4 headline stories.
Awesome. Well, we've got a diesel truck walking on by, so I'll talk so that you can have a sip of coffee in the meantime. And so you mentioned Kickstarter, which is a great way for someone who has a book to possibly raise some money and see if there's interest. How did you actually get your start into publishing?
Well, I went up to a little town called Flin Flon in Manitoba. Not town, city they call it. But anyways, Flin Flon, Manitoba, and I had a book. I've been writing. I had quite a collection of novels that I had completed drafts on. And I had this one that was pretty much ready to go, and I was tired of the whole traditional, where you send it in and then we'll think about it for a year and then we'll say no, and you do it over and over and over again. So I said, well, there was this little publishing company in Flin Flon that a lot of the people in Flin Flon used for their books. So it's what I would call a cooperative company. That they basically charged. I paid for the cover and I paid for the editing, which was less than what I would have paid if I were nowadays. I pay more for my cover and more for my editing now than I paid them. And then I just bought 100 books off of Offset Press because the print on demand was just getting started at that point. So
and it's still pretty expensive.
Offset is more expensive than print on demand, depending on how many books you want.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to order 100 or 200 books, then Offset's the way to go. But
is that Offset as a company, or is that a type of publishing?
That's a type of printing. That's where they set up the print things. The paper goes through. It's like the newspaper printing.
Okay.
Print on demand is a little bit different. That they can print one book, or they can print 25 books or 50 books, and it's pretty much, it doesn't.
It's more like drop shipping for books.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, how long ago actually was that? Because you recognize that you did a non-traditional style of publishing from the get.
That was 2010.
2010. So you're actually a fairly new almost to the publishing scene in a way.
Well, I've sort of got in. There were a lot of people into the electronic books, of course, well before 2010, but the print on demand part of it started getting really picking up around maybe 2005, 2006. Amazon had Create Space. There was a company called Lulu.
Well, there's Wattpad that kind of is.
Well, Wattpad's a really weird. It's basically what you write on Wattpad. You serialize your book or your story.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't get paid for it. You get people who comment on it, and there's some really interesting people on Wattpad.
Yeah, it's like Tumblr of the book publishing world in a way.
Well, yeah, and the fact that 80% of the people on Wattpad are, teenage girls.
It's fanfic.
It's crazy. It is crazy. Some of the nastiest writing I've ever written was written by 14-year-old girls.
Yeah, I was reading some serialized stuff on Wattpad a couple of years ago, and there's some good stuff out there. But yeah, it's diamonds in the rough, which, I think that's the beauty of the internet, right? Is you can publish it and put it out there, and whether or not people decide to read or not, eventually it'll polish hopefully into a nice shiny diamond.
Well, that's the thing, and there were people who got contracts out of writing on Wattpad, and the problem was as soon as they got a contract, they had to change the way that they were doing things. They couldn't just write up this sort of really rough news. They had to polish it, and if you don't know how to polish your writing, you're in trouble.
Yeah, and so we kind of met in the peripheries of the online Camus creative community.
Mm-hmm.
And so you mentioned earlier that you pay for editing, but you're also an editor yourself.
That's correct, yeah.
So is that because you would miss over the mistakes that you make yourself and you need that second pair of eyes? And
Definitely. Yeah, I've gone over my story so many times that I see what I expect to see, not what's actually there.
Yeah.
So I need another pair of eyes. I use beta readers, and I have a few editors that I turn to work on stuff,
Okay.
and it makes things a lot better.
And what's your process for writing? Is it starting on paper? Are you like an old school typewriter? Or are you?
No, I use the computer because the paper and the typewriter can't keep up with me. And then, so I just basically, like I said, before we started recording, I binge write. I'll write a novel in 30 days. So at one point, I was 100,000 words in 30 days. Now it's 50 to 75,000 words.
And that would be kind of like how inch thick of a book or page count, or?
Well, the 100,000 word book at a trim size of 5.5 by 8.5 with 12-point font was 347 pages.
Okay.
You have to take all that into account.
Yes.
I could have I could make it 100 pages, but you'd need a magnifying glass to read it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely an interesting world right now because we're actually seeing more and more people flip back to paper copies of books, right? The Kindle days had their heyday and they kind of come back to paper. Are you seeing that as well? Are you a digital readership or a print mostly readership?
I have mostly digital simply because I don't have room for the books anymore. At one point, books were more than 50% of the total weight of all my possessions. So I had to cut back, and then so I have about 400 books on my phone. I would argue that the what's happening is not so much that Kindle isn't working anymore. It's more that Kindle isn't working for the big publishers who put out these statements about ebooks are dead. And one of the major reasons is because they charge as much for an ebook as they would charge for a paperback.
Yes.
So given the choice between an ebook and a paperback, people are taking the paperback. So the ebooks is not a model that they really are comfortable with or know what to do with. Now, the people who are indies, our books are published probably at half the price that the traditional publishers publish their ebooks. So we have to sell more books, but they do sell more books. I know I got quite a number of people, friends of mine online, who that's their living is writing books, and they make their money through ebooks, publishing on Amazon and other places.
What did you do before you were publishing? Are you retired from like a previous career, or?
Well, sort of. I was a minister in the United Church for
Interesting.
just over 3 decades, and then at some point my brain said this was enough, but you can't do this anymore, and it just sort of shut down. And so I'm on disability now, and so I'm all right as long as I'm not in a situation where there's much in the way of stress.
Yeah.
You know.
Which you had quite a bit this year.
Well, yeah, there's stress and then there's stress. Like, I can't go into a church without spiking a migraine headache.
Interesting.
Like it's just that kind of reality for me. So,
I've always respected the United Church because they're one of the few. Like, I grew up in a church for all school years. I'm not a churchgoer no more.
Yeah.
But I always respect the United Church because they were okay with, homosexual ministers, and they would often fly the Rainbow Pride Parade flag for decades almost. It's always been a very open.
Yeah, I remember that particular discussion because it started just as I started my career and took about 15 years for it to work through the whole process. And it was interesting because the decision wasn't, everybody says, oh, well, the decision was to ordain, gays and lesbians as ministers, and that wasn't the decision. The decision was that we were not going to mention sexuality or any other thing in the process, in the policy. If we were really going to assume that God had called these people, then we were going to trust God to know what she was doing and not try to put barriers in the way.
It's cool that I just caught you use the she word there.
Definitely. So the real thing was not a matter of, okay, these people are okay, because of course they're okay, but that we can't put ourselves over the Spirit's action and say who isn't or who is or who isn't called, which I really liked, sort of the nuances of that.
Totally. I come from the Vineyard congregation, which, if you are familiar with the Toronto Airport Revival, right, was a big split in terms of, do we believe Scripture or do you believe these visions, speaking in tongues, prophesize style of things, right? And where do you fall there, right? Like, if God's word is both written and spoken through people, who do you believe, right? And so it was an interesting time and place, and it sounds like the United Church kind of figured, well, hey, if someone's called to it, they're called to it, and let them do what good they can.
Well, there's a process that we have to test to test their call, and everybody goes through that process. It doesn't matter what background you are. Everybody goes through that process, and that's really what it comes down to. And as how do you test? And the big test is whether it's going to do harm or whether it's going to do good.
Yeah.
So
now I'll make probably a less than stellar joke here, but were you reading fantasy back when you were a minister?
Oh, I was. I've been reading fantasy since I ran out of the nonfiction science section in my school library at about the age of 12. So I started reading sci-fi and then into fantasy. And I've been reading it ever since. And there's no issue between fiction and religion. The Victorians had this, or I think it was Victorians or some people in that period had this idea that novels were bad because they were made up stories. They were like lies. No.
Well, Jesus spoke in parables to begin with, so.
Well, yeah, he was quite the creative type.
Absolutely. And so I forget what drew you to camos. Was it your son that was here?
Yeah, my son and my grandkids are here. So since I wasn't working, I could live wherever I wanted. So I decided to come here and be close to him and the grandkids and help support their family.
What was your initial reaction moving to Kamloops coming from Manitoba?
Well, I'd been here a couple of times, so I knew what to expect. But it was nice. Other than having deer chase me down the road a couple of times, and I was walking by MacArthur Park. It was a nice spot. It's too bad that the building we were in burnt, but we would have had to move at some point anyways for his girlfriend and the kids to join us. So
okay, so you're all living together at this point then? And
yeah, one big happy family mostly. It's life, right? So
it's like any family.
Already happy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the Rivers Trail is a beautiful area to be.
Oh, it's gorgeous. Yep.
It's kind of one of those things that lots of people in Kamloops who use it a lot, but those who don't seem to want to get out to it don't know what they're missing.
Yeah.
And so what's next on the horizon for Alex Mcgilvery, published author?
Well, I've got a book coming out in October. It's the second in my steampunk series. The first was Calliope and the Sea Serpent. So this picks up this one picks up with the next part of her career.
Okay.
And it's called Calliope and the Royal Engineers.
Do you sketch out the rising action, the plot, or do you just put your fingers down to the keyboard and just type and see where it goes and then edit?
I've done both. And I really believe that you need to have the skills to do either one. So when people are starting, I'll say, use an outline, because it helps you to understand the structure of your story if you can outline it. But you also need to have the skill of just sort of following the story and intuitively creating that outline as you go. If you're telling a good story, the structure will happen on its own. But I use outlines as much for editing as I do for writing. But the last book, the one I wrote this summer, I outlined it pretty thoroughly because I had no idea where I was going to go with it. And then I decided to do something completely different anyways by the time I got into it. But
it's funny how that goes, right? You have this grand idea in your head, and by the time you actually go to it, you start taking what appears to be shortcuts at times, but it really comes out organically, the more powerful message or story. Or do you fighting with that original idea in your head versus what comes on paper?
Well, I'm not. I know people who talk about their characters run their stories, and I don't let my characters push me around, but that need to sort of be aware of what's going on and what the story is. I've edited more than one book where the person was writing the wrong story. They were determined that they were writing, this particular person's story about this or that, and I'm saying no.
How do you tell someone that their vision is wrong in art, right, where things are so subjective? How do you approach that?
Well, what I do is I don't tell them that their vision is wrong. What I do is I point out that this particular part of their vision is what's carrying the story, and if they build on this piece rather than this piece, then their story will be stronger. A lot of the times I'll tell them, I said, oh, you've got all this extra stuff written. I said, don't throw it away. Never, ever delete anything.
Make a copy of the file.
Put it in a file, label it, excerpts from whatever, because you can always put them out as short stories based in that same world. You can use it in a different book. There's always times that you can go back and use that old stuff. It's a really good resource to have.
So in a way, you're like a editing consultant of sort, right? And I've done my fair share of consulting work, in which you have to be assertive and not aggressive, but you have to like tell them, this is what is wrong. If you do this is going to be better.
Yeah.
Right. How do you have self-doubts when it comes to that too? Because who knows, maybe the complete opposite was what would really take off.
Well, the thing is what I work on is the basis that the story belongs to the author. And so I will make suggestions, and I'll write examples of, what I think would look like if they took my suggestion. But I don't order them or tell them they have to do this or this will happen. I'm working with a client now, and this is her first book. She's brand new to the whole writing and revising thing, and she's working really, really hard at it. And there's a few things that I've just said, all right, every time I suggest this, she comes back and she's got the same thing. So I'm just going to leave it because that's the way she wants it.
Yeah.
It really is, because I'm a content editor. I do the basic story structure, plot, character kind of thing. So really what I'm working on is everybody who hires me to edit essentially gets their own private writing course. How to structure the novel, how to create characters, how to build the book around that structure.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I've had more than a few people who've ended up as Amazon bestsellers.
Oh, nice.
Which is always fun.
Oh, absolutely. And it just goes to add to your brand of an editor or your small little publishing consultancy.
Yeah, well, I have part of my website is all the list of books that I've edited that are out available, so that people can go and read them. It's and some people put when they register the book on Amazon or whatever, they'll put me down as a contributor, as an editor. So if you Google Alex Mcgilvery on Amazon, you'll get all of these books that are written by other people, but I'm there as the editor. So it's sort of funny because you have to dig to find mine.
The internet's a funny place, right? Where someone can overtake your own work by accident, and
well, it's I don't mind. It's just sort of cool. I just let people know. I said, there's a lot of this stuff, it's my editing rather than my writing, but they're good books anyway. So whether they buy those books or buy mine, I'm not really worried about making a whole lot of money writing. Like 80% of authors, and this is traditional or indie, make less than $1,000 a year.
Oh wow.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a passion project, labor of love then.
Yeah, it's people. I have stories that I want to get out there, so I put them out, and I get people read them and they enjoy them, and okay, that's the big thing. I do the editing and pay for my writing habit. If I didn't have the editing, I couldn't afford to publish my books. But
okay, and are you for the clients you're working with? Are they mostly in the fantasy genre as well?
No, I've worked. The one I'm working on, I've got a thriller, a historical fiction. I've got a fantasy coming up. I've got a sci-fi in the queue. I've done horror. I've done romance.
So you've done them all. You
I
haven't pigeonholed yourself.
I've even done some nonfiction stuff. Like I've if it's got words, I can work with it.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, it's the internet's been is an interesting place. With the rise of publish an ebook this and do that. What are kind of Alex Mcgilvery's top 3 tips that you find yourself keep on sharing with your clients?
Well, the first thing is the first thing is you have to finish the first draft. You have to finish your book. You can't really edit a book that's not finished. So if you want to be a writer, you have to write, and not worry about. Right off the bat, you don't worry about the quality. You just worry about, okay, I'm telling this story. I'm gonna do the best I can to tell the story. The second thing is don't sweat the mistakes. Like people get into, I got to show and not tell. I can't use adverbs. I got to watch, do this or that or the other thing. I said, just when you're writing, when you're doing your first draft, don't worry about all that. Just write. I said, what you do is what happens when when you go back and you're doing your first revision, you mark all those places where you've used adverbs or you've used all these things that people say you're not supposed to use, and you look at why they're there. What is your brain trying to tell you about that particular little bit of the story? So adverbs mean that you need to expand this a little bit. You need to make it a little stronger, a little bit more exciting. If you've got he shed, she shed all the way through and they turn into talking heads, then you need to look at it and say, how do I anchor this in the story? I need more setting, I need more action. Mm-hmm. So you put beats in there, which are little action bits between the sentences. So all of these things are telling us something. They're not just mistakes that we erase. They're things that we pay attention to that tell us we're typing so fast, our brain is saying, make a note here. So we do that and we keep going. Then we go back, we read the notes. And the last thing is that, it should be, I won't say fun, because revising isn't a whole lot of fun. But when you get to the end of it, you should be able to read your book and feel that, this was worth it. This was good. I tell people when I'm doing their workshops on writing and editing, I say one of the things you do is you read your book just before you publish it. I said, because you get to the point it was like, that was a pretty good book. And it builds your confidence, because you can't sell a book if you don't have confidence in it. And it doesn't matter whether you're doing indie publishing or sending to a traditional publisher or whatever, you need to have that confidence. So read the book and realize that you've written a book that's enjoyable. Mm-hmm. And the rest of it will come. It's just developing. It's just increasing the size of your toolbox. You could be the guy with the one little red toolbox, or you could be the mechanic with this, great stack of tools. It's just a matter of you develop things.
Awesome. Yeah, I've had a idea for a book, and I've maybe gotten, 2 paragraphs out before, and I got the concept, and I almost want someone to just write it, because the idea is just like, I would actually be interested in reading it, and I'll be honest, I haven't read a lot of books in recent years. I've been a lot into the audiobook side of things. Is that something that you've explored?
Well, I've looked into it, but it's so expensive to get audiobooks done. There's you either pay people an exorbitant amount of money to narrate the books, which is not unreasonable given that they're basically reading your entire book out loud. Or they do a royalty share. The problem that I have with doing a royalty share is they're not going to make their money back on the royalties, because I don't market my books hard enough to sell that many books.
Yeah.
So it's not really fair. I would feel like I'm taking advantage of them. So,
have you thought about, creating a serialized kind of radio podcast program, and then try that route yourself, just off your cell phone, and seeing if you can kind of translate your already following crowd and grow it that way?
Well, I've thought about it once in a while, but these days, as soon as I start getting I start talking too long, I start stuttering and stammering, and it's hard to sort of read any decent amount of material without stumbling around. So it would make it harder to follow in some ways. But
yeah, I guess that's true. You do it by chapter. If well, I don't know. I think it's something that I considered for the book idea that I had. Right, if I could sketch out one chapter, put it on a podcast, and then slowly build it out, right? And kind of like that Wattpad model idea, but keep it on my own platform or whatever it be. Well, Alex, anything else you kind of want to share? Where can people find you, or anything you want to say?
My books you can find at alexmcgilvery.com. And there's sample chapters of all my books there, and short stories and stuff like that. My editing is CelticFrogEditing.com. When you can there's all my sites are linked. I do have a review site, but I haven't been doing much in the way of reviews recently. It's just of the three things that I do, it's got the lowest priority, so it's not as active as it used to be.
Yeah, there's always that. Amazon reviews kind of has that foothold on the online.
Well, I posted on Amazon, and then I had one day they cut almost 400 of my reviews from their site without any explanation. I never got any reason why they did it or anything else. It's just so at that point I just said
Was it like a particular publishing house that you were most of your reviews
this
for?
was books from all over the place, and they just all of a sudden they just disappeared. And
isn't that frustrating?
Well, it is, and partly, and it's getting worse. Like Amazon the reviews right now are they're coming and going, and so they're trying to fix a broken review system, but they're trying to fix it the wrong way.
Yeah.
So what's happening is that things are just generally falling apart, and it's very hard on authors, and it's hard to some extent on the readers, because you look at a book one day, it'll have 400 reviews and be scoring around 4 out of 5 stars, and the next day it'll have 20 reviews and be scoring 3 stars. It's just the same book. It just depends on how many reviews Amazon has cut or added back in.
Oh, strange.
Yeah.
I have not heard of that, but I can understand, because there is a whole industry of Amazon reviews.
Well, yeah, there's a whole underground thing of people doing paid reviews and stuff. The easiest the easiest thing to do would be to have people who are sort of recognized reviewers, that you do so many reviews, they come up as legitimate. So okay, now you're a recognized reviewer, and unless something really strange comes up, they're not going to fuss about your reviews, and that narrows down a huge proportion. That then they can just focus on the few ones that are strange, and it's not the majority of reviews that are strange. It's just it's always that 2% to 10% who are trying to play the game.
Yeah.
And it's not just Amazon. To be honest, they were doing this when there were reviews in print and magazines and newspapers.
Yeah.
It was the same deal. It's just a little harder, but the New York bestsellers list had to withdraw somebody's name and take away their ability to call themselves a New York Times bestseller because they'd played the system to get on the list.
Well, it's getting even worse these days, right?
Yeah.
With social media and whatnot, right? And
it makes it easier.
It makes it easier, totally, right? And not to say that I haven't experimented with ideas and that sort of concept myself, A, to understand how it works, and B, to see if it does work, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's Yeah, that's a whole nother story. Even though it's not a very long one, but a whole another conversation to have of this whole fake it till you make it with, online clout is you got to do the work.
Yeah.
If you're a writer, you got to write.
Yeah, you have to have a good product, and it doesn't matter whether you're traditional or whether you're indie. You have to have a good product. If you don't have a good product, you're not gonna get your books out there. And that's been the same even before from the pulp fiction days, when most science fiction and fantasy went through these magazines, newsprint magazines. You had to have a good story, or they wouldn't pick you up.
Which is almost kind of what the traditional publishing model is nice about it, right? Like the fact that you have almost that curation of the content.
Well, the problem with the traditional publishing model is that they curate stories not based on quality. They curate their stories based on the sellability of that story.
Okay, I can see that.
So there's a difference. Now, certainly, a sellable story may or may not have a higher quality. I can name some books that sell really well, and their quality is horrific.
Well, the E.L. James, right, that was just like a huge marketing niche gap that was easily filled.
Yeah.
Right? And, you or I, in theory, could have taken that if we recognized the gap and wanted to fill it back then, too, right? So it's... Yeah, you're totally right in the whole. It's the ability to sell.
Yeah, and when people are looking for, and I don't discourage people from going to the traditional publishers if that's what they want, but I tell them, I said, if they turn you down, it's not because your story is not a good story. It's because they don't think they can sell it.
Yeah.
And I said that's a different thing.
Something like Chicken Soup for the Soul was turned down by like 130 different publishers.
Yeah,
because they thought no one wants to read short story anthologies, right? And they're now on how many umpteen dozen different variations of that anthology, right?
But you have there's all kinds of these stories of how many times people were rejected by publishers before they were published. J.K. Rowling, it was 16. Dr. Seuss, it was 26. You can go on and on and on about how often they were rejected, and usually it's because they're setting the trend rather than following the trend.
Mm-hmm.
So the publishers and the booksellers are looking at it and saying, well, we don't know what to do with this. We're not sure if we can sell it. So they keep backing away. And then once, of course, it sells, and they're happy.
Who's going to take the risk on that first time?
Yeah. And like J.K. Rowling, she got published the first time because a friend owed her a favor and said, well, we'll publish a few hundred copies and see how it went.
Thank you, friend.
Yes, definitely. But it didn't really get big until it crossed the ocean from Britain to America. It wasn't big in Britain before it came here.
Yeah, and I would never have knew who Harry Potter was if I didn't get forced to go sit in the corner in third grade and right in front of the bookshelf and picked up and learned about the boy who slept in the cupboard.
But the thing is that you get authors like J.K. Rowling create readership. Like people. If somebody's successful, it doesn't mean that they're taking readers out of my pocket. What it means is they're creating more readers for everybody.
Totally.
So it's not a competition. I'm there. I go to conferences and spend a lot of time talking to people, mentoring people, trying to get them to whatever point they want to be at, whether it's ready to publish traditionally or whether it's indie. Because I want to see as many books out there as high quality as possible.
Yeah, it's the concept of there's no small creator. He's a YouTuber named Cody Warner, and that was his mantra. and he's recently blown up because a bigger creator recognized him, and the way it went. But like, the concept is the act of creation is just so huge that it's an oxymoron to say that you can be a small creator.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, Alex, thank you for meeting with me and hanging out with me outside, enjoying a coffee on this, Thursday morning?
Yeah, Thursday morning, and the fall went away. It's back to summer.
Yeah.
At least for now.
It's warming up. This is my favorite time of year.
Yeah.
Bar none. And we just got another onlooker. People are curious of what the setting was. I've recorded a podcast yesterday, which I don't know if it'll get released or not. It's the first one where I have to more or less get the thumbs up, thumbs down from the interviewee because it was rather personal. And people are always just curious about what is this stuff, and because they don't realize that you can just go out and create something on your own. You don't need to have the okays from the publishing gods or whatever it be. So thank you once again, Alex. And check out alexmcgilvery.com or just Google him. You'll find all the plethora of different books he's written or been involved with if you end up on Amazon. And he's also found in the Kamloops creative community. So if you are someone who's wanting to try out some sort of creative endeavor, it's a great Facebook group of encouraging creators. I've been chatting with one of the admins, Shannon, about possibly chatting with her shortly. So hopefully I can schedule that podcast in. And till next time, please share with your friends and subscribe. Cheers. Bye-bye.